What if the worst thing that ever happened to you wasn't what broke you, but what came after? On today's show, I talk with S.E. Howard, an author who isn't afraid to stare down the darkest corners of trauma, survival, and memory. If you'd like to support the show, consider subscribing to my Patreon at patreon.com/The Dark Mind Podcast. Your support keeps the conversation going. So without further ado, I give you S.E. Howard. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Hi, great to be here. Thank you for inviting me on.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining me on this 11th day of June 2025. I came across your work on Bookstagram and was really drawn in by the premise. However, I had no idea where the narrative was ultimately going to take me. I love the web of intrigue you wove, transforming standard serial killer fare into an outright speculative nightmare, infusing so many different elements and twists that I thought my head was going to explode. The climax of the story was totally unexpected, and then totally unexpected again. So thank you very much for writing such a thrilling novel and joining me on the show to discuss it.
Thank you very much for all the compliments. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, so the book is about a young man named Josh who was abducted by a man named Michael Trainer and held against his will for 19 days of abuse, of which he doesn't remember due to amnesia from being drugged. The one thing he does remember is another young boy being present in the room where he was being kept. He's contacted by an FBI agent named Rodriguez, who is working the cold case of a missing boy named Avery. Rodriguez states that Trainer claims the boy in question that Josh remembers is Avery, but insists he didn't kill him and has information that could help with the case, though he will only talk to Josh. Rodriguez really needs Josh's help because if they can't find Avery's body and charge Trainer with murder, he will soon be eligible for parole. So Rodriguez asks Josh to accompany him to the prison to get that information. And that's where the story begins. So in chapter 1, the story opens with Josh arriving at the prison. His physical and emotional discomfort is palpable before we even know why. What made you decide to start the story here rather than with the abduction or the investigation?
A couple of reasons. Primarily, I wanted to give the story a really powerful and emotional beginning. Years ago, I had gone to a writing workshop, and the editor who was presenting the workshop talked to us about how the writer's job is to hook the reader from the very first line. And one of the recommendations that he made along that effect was to open in the middle of action. So it instantly draws the reader in and gets them emotionally invested in your story and the character. Starting at the prison to me was a great introduction, not only to Josh, but the general setup for the story, because the reader sees Josh in a state where he's very anxious and upset, but at the same time, he's summoning a lot of courage because he's getting ready to go in as an adult and confront the man who had abducted him as a child.
Well, the idea of Josh visiting Trainer in his cell reminded me of Hannibal Lecter. Hannibal was a respected psychiatrist who turned out to be a monster, and Trainer was a respected lawyer who committed something monstrous. Was that parallel intentional or something that emerged organically as you wrote?
Very much organically. And I definitely can see the parallels between Silence of the Lambs and The Vessel. And in fact, when I was pitching the book, that was one of the comparable titles that I would use. To me, the big difference is that Hannibal Lecter is a character, he's kind of an anti-hero. So we know he's done terrible, horrendous things, but in the story itself, he's seen as more of a friend to Clarice, or the reader likes him, even though he's done despicable things. And I really didn't want that kind of association with Trainer whatsoever. I wanted to always keep it clear in the reader's mind that Trainer was a very despicable person who had done despicable things, and that he wasn't providing information for the investigation out of any kind of altruistic efforts, that he wasn't an anti-hero. He was very much the villain of the story.
Yeah. When you were talking about Lecter being an anti-hero, it made me immediately think of when Miggs, multiple Miggs in the next
yes,
cell.
Yes, exactly.
Or is it something, that, like, to me, that one part, and spoiler alert, folks, if you haven't seen this movie that was made in 1991, the part where he says Miggs is dead, they heard, what was it? They heard Hannibal whispering to him and Miggs crying. They found him at bed check. He'd swallowed his own tongue. I was like, yeah, don't mess with Clarice.
Exactly. Or at the end, when Lecter sees the doctor, the psychiatrist who's on the lam in Mexico, and he tells Clarice over the phone, I'm having a friend for dinner. Well, everybody in the audience reacts and laughs and cheers like, yay. We're rooting for him to do something bad. And I never wanted that similar kind of association for Michael Trainer.
I actually feel kind of bad for the actor that played Dr. Chilton, because, like, I've seen him in a few movies where he's just a scummy, like,
yes,
just like
he's always typecast as the creep.
Yeah, 8mm with
John Cusack.
No, Nicolas Cage.
Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, he's the lawyer for the family of the guy that had the snuff film made. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that poor guy. Typecast as a creep. Hi, my name is whatever his name is.
There's very good money in it because most stories have a character that falls right into those parameters. So
yeah, I bet he can get a lot of work. Well, circling back to the book, Josh's voice is raw, angry, and guarded. Did you find it challenging to write in first person when so much of his pain is buried or avoided?
I don't think so. Writing in first person viewpoint has always been one of my favorite approaches to narrative styles. And with Josh, I struggled with his character until I got to a scene that really clearly defined him for me. In the book, there's a scene where he's recounting what happens when he's returned after his abduction, and he tries to go back to school. And when he goes back to school, the other kids at the adults treat him with kid gloves, so to speak, while the other kids are very cruel. They either gossip and whisper about him or they tease him. And so he keeps getting into fist fights at school, and eventually he's withdrawn from school altogether. But the scene where he's relaying that and how he would get angry, his entire situation has just made him furious. He's angry about what happened. He's angry that nobody believes him. He's angry that his own family doesn't want to acknowledge what happened and sweep it under the rug. And then he's angry when he goes back to school that he's treated so cruelly, and so he lashes out. And once I figured out that that was his viewpoint of the world, that he wasn't as much a victim as he was angry, that really defined him clearly in terms of writing from his perspective.
Gotcha. Well, in chapter 2, Josh meets with Trainer in the prison, on the other side of plexiglass, of course. Trainer begins to talk about their time together and insists that Josh remembers more than he thinks. That question of memory, what's real, what's repressed, what's implanted, is a major theme in this story. What drew you to explore trauma through this lens?
I think I've always been found it very interesting how the human mind can compartmentalize things in terms of emotions, experiences, and memories, and how traumatic events, our brain can repress those, even from ourselves, to protect us. And that was really the angle that I went with that. There was a combination in the story of where Josh is drugged during his abduction, and that pharmaceutically impedes his memory, but at the same time, he does it to himself as well. And I think for a lot of victims of any kind of trauma, that they have to find a way to compartmentalize that experience, because otherwise the stress and the grief and the myriad of emotions that accompany what happened to them in those memories would be overwhelming. You couldn't get on with your life unless you found a way to compartmentalize them.
Well, still kind of piggybacking on that line of inquiry, localized dissociative amnesia comes up earlier in the book, and you treat it seriously, not just as a plot device, but as a reality Josh has to live with. How did you research or conceptualize that condition?
For me, research is a lot of times it's more fun than the actual writing of the book itself. And so I tend to fall down lots of different kinds of rabbit holes when I'm researching a project that I'm working on. The fact that I wanted Rodriguez in particular to be not just an FBI investigator, but a clinical psychologist. So I knew that he would have to understand the lingo and the therapy techniques that a clinical psychologist would apply in those kinds of situations. So I did a lot of research on it. I found it was really, really interesting. And again, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the mind compartmentalizing when trauma occurs as a self-defense mechanism. So to me, the idea that in the face of just unimaginable trauma as a self-defense mechanism, the brain hides that memory away from you so that you're not even aware of it is fascinating.
Yeah. Do you remember to clear your browser history? Because speaking of the FBI.
No, if I am ever arrested, God only knows what people will think. I do have a funny story pertaining to, I know we were going to talk about the red light district and a little bit on this. So I actually do have a fun story of online research that goes along with that.
Oh God, did you go on a campsite?
Completely accidentally. Well, not accidentally. I didn't realize that I was clicking into a room with a real cam boy. And so I was like, oh my God. Clicked right back out of that real quickly.
We believe you. No. Oh God, yeah. I've who was it? I forget the name of the show I was watching, some sort of like Dateline type of show, but they were talking about, it's totally legal, but they were talking about the insane amounts of money people make doing that. A lot of people don't, but they were interviewing this guy that ran a cam room operation. Like he had a building with a bunch of different rooms with people working for him that he was taking a cut. Like this guy. Yeah, it's a real...
Honestly, yes. That was one thing that I learned too, because I never in a million years would have thought that something like that could be as profitable as it is. And it's huge. It's a huge industry. And it's one of those where anybody can do it. Why you would want to, I'm not exactly sure. I wouldn't do it, but apparently... it's a very lucrative field. And it was just not anything that I was aware that it was out there, but I had no idea how prevalent it was, how many people partook of it, and just how much money there is to be made for people who are successful at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty wild. People
makes me rethink some.
I know. Like,
what am I doing wrong in life?
Make way more money than me. Maybe I need to get in the gym really hard and kind of tighten everything up. No. Well, circling back to the book, Josh's sister Bree's presence is gentle, but Josh still recoils. What does their dynamic allow you to explore that the other relationships in the story don't?
I think with Josh, when he comes home from being abducted, I based his experiences on a lot of real life abductions. And one of the primary ones, especially in relation to his family and being reintegrated into society, was a case with a boy who was named Stephen Stainer. He was abducted and he was held for a prolonged period of time. But really, when he came back, his family didn't seek therapy for him. They tried to pretend like it never happened, and they expected him to act publicly like it didn't happen and that he had bounced back from it and everything was fine. And so a lot of that is what I based Josh's relationship with his family and their reaction to his abduction. To me, the character of Bree was the antithesis of that. She was one of the few people that Josh feels like he can trust, but she's also more than a sibling. She steps up into a parenting role for him. He talks about in the course of the story that as he developed into adolescence, he got into lots of conflicts with his parents and moved out. As Roldy drops out of school, he moves in with his sister. And so Bree has always been his anchor, his port in the storm, so to speak. She's the steadying force that keeps him grounded, but she's also the person that, as he says in the book, when he wakes up from nightmares about his experience, he can always call her. She's always there. She's always there to comfort him. She doesn't offer any kind of judgment or any of the other reactions he would expect to get from his parents in particular. When something happens with him or when he's upset.
Gotcha. Yeah, and there's I'm not going to reveal any spoilers, but there's kind of some information she has that kind of changes things a little bit. Listeners at home, you're going to have to read the book. I'm not saying anything. But in chapter 3, we learn, as we've been talking about, his side gig, which he does solo cam shows on a platform called Red Light District, and there's got to be some sort of a cam platform or something similar that's called Red Light District. Is there?
Not Red Light District. I based it on a couple. There are some pretty popular platforms. And that was one of the things that I learned when I was researching this. Some of the things that Josh talks about through the narrative in the story about how it masks his IP address, how he can go in and they can block certain geographic areas from being able to get to his chat room so that somebody who knows him in a specific geographic area wouldn't be able to say, oh my God, he has a camera. Those things are all real. A lot of the platforms that offer these live cam shows are set up entirely to protect the identity of the models that work for them or contract through them. It's a very, very sophisticated setup. Actually, that was one thing that really surprised me, is that it's not really, a mom and pop operation. There are some really legitimate and secure websites that offer this service. I sound like I'm hawking.
Well, I'm just like, there's got to be, like a cam. The name is just too perfect. There's got to be some sort of like a cam platform called Red Light District.
And I was able to look up the name of it right now. I was close. It's called Live Jasmine. The Red Light District is actually based off of a cam model platform that's called Live Jasmine. And I did a lot of my research by visiting that site. There are lots of instructional pages on the site or on sites related to it that tell you, if you're interested in being a cam model, how to set up an account, the way it works, the way the games work, the way the models make money, and all of the security features that a platform like that offers to the models to help protect their identity and keep them safe. It was really, really interesting. I guess I walked into it thinking something like that would be more of a mom and pop operation. And it's really, these are pretty sophisticated endeavors, and they obviously have online security for their participating models and mine too.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good business model. You got to take care of the people that are making the money.
Yes.
You know what I did find for Red Light District though was they have live cams in Amsterdam's red light district.
Well, that was part of the reason. The red light district is an old euphemism for prostitution, and so that's really why I picked that and the Police song, of course, Roxanne.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a fascinating turn in the story. It's part survival, part control, part performance. So what inspired you to include this as a major part of his post-trauma life?
to me, it was important that Josh reclaimed agency over his body and his sexuality after his experience. I think it was important for him. One of the things that he talks about in the book, he talks about his sexuality. He's gay, and he's afraid to tell his parents because he thinks that his parents will assume it's because he was abducted as a child, even though he admits it's something that he felt and acknowledged in himself long before that. So it serves a dual purpose. The red light district gives him agency over his own body. He's making, and his sexuality. It's his choices that he's making. I think in a lot of ways too, it explores some contradictions in Josh's nature. He wants to be isolated, but at the same time, he's lonely. So an online platform where he interacts with people gives him that opportunity without him having to build any kind of lasting or in-person relationships. It's anonymous, but there are still personal connections that are made. And then, like I said, again, it really helps him reclaim agency over his body after he didn't for so long.
Well, so the intimacy of the prose mirrors the intimacy of Josh's sex work. It's almost voyeuristic for the reader. Were you intentionally playing with that boundary between reader and witness?
I don't know that it was intentional or not, but I wanted to put the reader in the moment with Josh, because to him, during the course of the story, without giving any spoilers, during the course of the story, he becomes more capable of developing deeper, more meaningful personal relationships with people, getting closer to people. But when the story opens and the reader's first introduced to him, he's very hands-off. He keeps people, with the exception of Bree, at a relative distance. He talks about how he can count the number of friends he has on one hand and have fingers left over. The only person that he really has besides Bree who's a friend is a person, his friend Paul, with whom he has consensual sex, but it's pretty much just what you would call I don't know if I can say this, a fuck buddy, and so he doesn't understand intimacy. He doesn't have any intimate relationships. And so I guess by immersing the reader in those scenes where he participates in activities through the red light district, I'm hoping the reader gets a sense of this is as close as he gets to connecting with other people. This is as close as he allows himself to get.
Yeah, it's kind of obviously it's a bit of hyper reality because it's online, it's virtual, a very liminal space. Mm-hmm. Gets right up to the razor's edge of human contact. Well, in chapter 4, we get a look into the aftermath of the trauma Josh suffered and how he was treated by friends, family, and even people he didn't know as a result of it. What did you want to explore through the way Josh's family handles his return, particularly the emotional distance and confusion between them?
Again, I really based a lot of his family's reaction and his experience off real life abduction cases, the Stephen Stainer case in particular. When I was researching, there's a different stigma that's attached when it's a boy who's abducted by a pedophile or a predator as opposed to a girl. We tend to have a lot of empathy and sympathy for girls. And you can see it, with Casey Dugard and all the young women who are abducted and taken. But if it's a young man, there tends to be some suspicion, or not suspicion, but they don't evoke that same level of empathy. One of the things that I read about Steven Stainer, he said when he came home, he had been abducted for years. So it was big.
Is this him? Okay.
Yes. And when he came home, he said it was an even bigger adjustment because he had been gone for years. But one of the lines that really struck me was he said, "I don't understand why my dad won't hug me anymore." And I think that really hit home for me because men, as a rule of thumb, aren't demonstrative with their emotions anyway, even in family settings, even among fathers and sons in a lot of cases. And as a son who's been abducted and sexually abused, to come home with that kind of shame and knowing that this has been done to you, knowing your parents are aware that this happened to you, and then the father having that awareness that this has happened to his son, it just compiles that emotional distance between them. It drives a literal wedge, I think, in many cases. At least it did for Steven Stainer, and that to me was really profound and sad. In Stainer's case, he died, I think it was within 10 years of him being rescued. So he died as a young man, and he was never able to close that gap with his father.
How did he die?
And I found that, he was in a motorcycle accident and was killed. It was still really tragic. And like I said, that line in particular, when he said, it was almost like he felt like he had done something wrong, that he had done something that made his dad ashamed of him, so that his dad didn't want to be emotionally connected or close to him anymore. And I took that as the basis for what happens between Josh and his father, and the alienation that the two feel between each other when Josh comes home.
Gotcha. Yeah. So how did the father's, I guess, I want to say version of masculinity, but I mean, maybe it has nothing to do with that. It's just kind of a combination of being ashamed of his son, and at the same time, I guess, holding some guilt himself because he didn't keep it from happening to his son. Like he's the man, he's supposed to.
And I don't think that it's that the father in my story, or that Steven Stainer's father in the real life example, were ashamed of their son. In fact, in the scene I had mentioned earlier, when Josh gets into a fight at school and his parents are called to the school, Josh kind of sums it up by saying he could tell by looking at his dad that his dad was ashamed, not because of Josh getting into a fight at school, but because of what had happened to him in terms of the sexual abuse. And he was ashamed of the fact that other people knew it, that everybody would know it looking at him. And I think that, I know you mentioned like the definition of masculinity, and Josh's father in the book is described as being a retired Army master sergeant, so a man's man. And I think in Josh's perspective, that plays a role in his father's reaction when he's returned home after his abduction. But I think in reality, it's a combination of things, and it's masculinity in general. It's that men aren't allowed to outwardly express their emotions and things like that. And so it was difficult for his father to come to him from a place of empathy without seeming like he was condescending almost. I really wanted to show that it was more than it wasn't just Josh's father, and it wasn't just Steven Stainer's father, that it was more of a societal expectations that caused that rift to occur, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Did, I noticed there was a documentary on Steven Stainer. I don't know.
There is a very famous TV movie that came out in the early 1980s. It was called I Know My Name is Steven. It's probably still something you can watch on at least YouTube, but it was like one of the most highly watched network movies of the week at the time. It was a very, very famous case, and it's faded over time, I think primarily because Stephen was killed. So he's not available. A lot of times with past victims of abductions, more contemporary ones like Sean Hornback or the girls that were found in Ohio and things like that, the media can go to them when there's another child abduction. They can use them for interview purposes and say what's going through the child's head, what's going to happen when the child gets home. They can make it. But with Stephen Stainer, he's not here to do that. So he's kind of drifted from public awareness over the years.
Yeah.
One of the things I touch on in the vessel too that I learned during the course of my research for this was just how painful it is for parents, that state of not knowing while your child is gone. And so that's one thing we had talked about, how Bree's role with Josh's life, his sister's role with him in the course of the story. And that's one thing she does with him is she tries to make him aware of what his parents went through when he was abducted. You're just constantly, one of the things I point out in the book, or Josh thinks about, is nobody gives you a playbook of how to react when your child is abducted. Nobody tells you what you're supposed to do or say. And so you're bombarded by the media, you're bombarded by public criticism. In Josh's case, because he was on his bicycle when he's abducted, he talks later in the book about how his parents were criticized. Who lets their kid ride their bike around unsupervised? I don't let my kid ride their bike off the street. There's just a flood. There are plenty of people that are empathetic and kind to parents in that situation, but there's a whole heck of a lot more who condemn them and criticize them. Plus, you have one of the cases I thought was really interesting that I had researched was Sean Hornbeck in Missouri. And that's been within the last 20 years, I believe. He is abducted and held for several years by a man who was a pizza restaurant manager in St. Louis. Sean was left alone at the apartment by himself. He'd been with the predator for so long, the predator trusted him not to run away.
Mm. That type of Stockholm syndrome is really weird.
It is. And to me, that's one thing that makes it really, really, those cases so interesting too. Children are just so malleable. I joke sometimes and I say they bounce really good, but they bounce back from things, but they really do, more so than the adults. I think that children are better able to rebound from that kind of trauma. That was one thing, like with Stephen Stainer, even though his family never encouraged him to get any kind of counseling and he didn't have any therapy to work through what had happened with him, he was always available to the media and talking to the media while he was alive. And he used to say that was his therapy. That helped him become a well-adapted or well-adjusted adult who went on to get married and have his own kids and have a happy life, because he was able to find his own way to deal with what had happened to him. And I think a lot of times kids rebound better than parents. One of the things I had mentioned with Sean Hornbeck was that when he was missing, his family went on TV talk shows. And on one of them, I believe it's either Montel Williams or Sally Jesse Raphael, one of those old ones.
There's a blast from the past.
Yes, a very famous psychic at the time who was always on the shows told his family he was dead, that he would drown and his body was somewhere in a river, on TV, on syndicated TV, telling them this. And that really occurs too. So that's one of the things that Josh kind of learns, and it helps him maybe think more kindly about his parents and his father in particular as he starts to become more aware of what they go through or what they went through while he was missing.
Yeah. Just one tiny brief aside, and I promise I will get back to the book, but if you are a fan of extreme horror in the arena of film, I don't know if you've ever seen a movie called 7 Days.
No.
So it is basically revenge porn. This man is an anesthesiologist, and a man abducts, assaults, and murders his 8-year-old child, I think. So he steals a ventilator, antibiotics, IV fluids, some other stuff from the hospital, and abducts the guy while he's in prison transport and brings him to a cabin that he owns that nobody knows about.
Oh my
and
goodness.
tortures him for 7 days.
There's another movie, and I can't think of what the name of it is, that's along the same lines. It's a couple who does it, though. They abduct a guy that they think had abducted or sexually molested or assaulted their child, and they do all kinds of horrible things to him, and the twist at the end is that the guy wasn't the one. They've done all of these horrible things, and it wasn't.
That sounds familiar.
And I can't think of what it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would be me if somebody hurt my child. So there's definitely like a wide range of reactions from parents. But I agree completely that if something, I would be so filled with rage, I would not be able to sit calmly in a courtroom with someone like that.
And YouTube, I am not glorifying violence. I'm just talking about a movie where a child predator is tortured, and it makes me smile. So, circling back to the book, in chapter 5, Josh meets Rodriguez at a local bar where Josh spends a lot of time due to it being walking distance from his apartment and being friends with the bartender, Paul. While there, a creepy man in glasses acts as if he recognized Josh from his cam work and refers to him as Mark, which is Josh's cam handle. I think it's Easy Mark, actually. There's a real power imbalance in that scene. The stranger knows a version of Josh, but Josh doesn't know him at all. What kind of emotional and thematic ground were you trying to cover with that interaction?
I think with that particular scene, there were a couple of things that I was hoping to accomplish. To that point in the story, it's not that Josh lives in an ivory castle, but he's satisfied with his life and he feels like he has everything in his life under control. And so that scene in particular rattles him. It causes him to have a panic attack. He's in a place where he feels safe, which is one thing that makes it even worse for him because the bar, as you said, is an extension of his home. It's some place where he feels like he can let his guard down. He's with his friend, Paul, and he feels like he's safe there. So to have this occur in that environment, it's very violating for him. But then to have the man recognize him from his cam work when he believes that he has all of these internet security measures in place to protect him from something like that ever happening to him, that's equally unnerving for him. And the fact that at first when the man approaches him and addresses him as Mark, Josh is like, you got the wrong guy. And he plays it off and he walks in the bathroom to get away from him and to try to settle down and calm himself. And while he's in there, the man follows him into the bathroom and just won't take no for an answer. He keeps insisting, kind of going along with things going, you said you like to play games. Is this a game you're playing? I like to play games too. And Josh finally just snaps. It's just something within him. It breaches all of his security measures and leaves him in a panic mode.
Yeah, I mean, the bar, I would say, is probably more of a bastion of security than his own home.
Yes, I think so too. I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah. And so now you've got this guy that's completely invaded the space. It's like he kind of crawled out of the camera.
Yes.
Yeah.
And even though Paul is aware that Josh does the webcam work, he still keeps those components of his life relatively separate. And again, he believed that there were security measures in place to keep anybody who ever knew him or would have seen him in the webcam shows from ever tracking him down in person. So to have those worlds collide like they do in that scene is extremely distressing to him.
Yeah. Well, as you said, the stranger confronts Josh in the bathroom, and the result of the confrontation is Josh having a full-on panic attack where he almost kind of just disassociates with reality. And that's where Rodriguez rushes in to take care of him. And the balance between protection and pressure is razor thin with Rodriguez. How do you see his motivations evolving as the story progresses?
I think Rodriguez is an interesting character because we We don't know a whole lot about him at the beginning of the story, except that he's an FBI agent and he's working on a task force who trying to pin additional crimes on Michael Trainer to prevent him from getting out of jail. So in my mind, I imagine that as a clinical psychologist, once he was assigned to the case and started learning more about Trainer's history of abduction, and in particular with Josh as his victim, Rodriguez would have done some digging. He would have found out more about Josh and his abduction and all the things that had happened to him, found out that what he does now, his life now. I think that he would know more about Josh than he initially lets on to Josh in the story when they're introduced. He kind of comes across as kind of lackadaisical, friendly like a frat boy. I use that term a lot to describe him just because he's kind of laid back and relaxed. And he's always just like, hey, come on, man, I'll buy you a cup of coffee, sit down for a few minutes and talk to me. But to me, from a clinical role, Rodriguez would have been initially really interested just from a psychology perspective in Josh. And then the more he learns about Josh and the more he learns about Josh's defense mechanisms to deal with what happened to him as a child, I think he develops a type of admiration in a way for Josh that helps them bond together and have a friendship that develops from that. Because I think that Rodriguez, even though initially sees Josh from a clinical perspective and from a clinical distance, as they get to know each other better and he learns more about Josh and the way he deals with things, it makes them more emotionally connected. Gotcha. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And kind of going back a little bit to his cam work, he's like in chapter 6, as he reflects on how much money he's making through the district, we see a complicated mix of survival, shame, and control. What were you hoping to convey about sex work in this context, not just financially, but emotionally? Because it seemed like not only was the work financially beneficial to him, it also helped him reclaim agency as far as his sexuality. But at the same time, it was a dirty secret. Like, he didn't want Rodriguez to know about it. He didn't want, I can't remember, did his sister know about it?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. But she cried, right?
But she cried, yes.
Yeah.
I think that that's true. There's such a social stigma that's attached with sex work. And I think that most people in today's society, it extends to more to interactions that are done completely online. Sex workers don't have to interact directly with other people anymore. It's not like back in the day when it was just a stripper and a hooker. But for some people, I can definitely see how somebody could look at something like cam modeling online, for example, and the amount of money that you could make from that. And if you could make, like in this instance, Josh makes, I think he makes $3,000 in a couple of hours.
All right,
from
that's it.
a client. And where do you do that? And he's thinking, because he has a day job too, one that he keeps for pretenses and insurance, if nothing else. So he's sitting here thinking to himself, my God, I could work 2-3 weeks at my day job and not make that much money. And so I definitely see the appeal for a lot of people, but it's not something that you could ever just walk out in public and go, hey, I have a cam show. Whee! So there's definitely that stigma that's associated with it. And I think that in a lot of ways, that's historically the way that the sex industry has been treated. And for a lot of people, definitely, yes, a lot of people are forced into sex work and don't want to be. You hear all the time about human trafficking or things like that, or people who are drug addicted, who do it for purposes like that. But then there are people who do it because that's the only way they have to make a good living. You know, when it's compared to that and working a low paying job that won't cover their bills. And if they have, they have bills to pay or they have children to feed and things like that, I can definitely see the appeal.
Yeah. Well, so many of Josh's emotional states are mirrored by his physical environments. sterile apartments, cramped bathrooms, and cold institutional spaces. How did you use setting to deepen the psychological tone of the story?
I hadn't really thought about it, to be honest, until I had read your question. And I found that to be a really interesting observation because, in a lot of ways, you're absolutely right. Josh's apartment is very bland. The only part of his apartment that he really spends any money on or any time in to any degree is the spare bedroom where his studio. And he's invested a lot of money in the equipment that he needs to make his cam show a success. But we don't really hear anything about the rest of his apartment. It's not of consequence to him. And as you mentioned earlier, Lupin's, the bar is more of a home to him. I described it as an extension of his home, but you're absolutely right and more accurate. It really is his home because that's where he feels the most comfortable. It's where he goes when he wants to have connections with other people, primarily his friend Paul. He feels relaxed and at ease there, which is something you would think that he would feel more at home. And I think it's because when he was abducted and he came back, he kind of reflects on this at one point in the story when he goes to visit his parents with his sister Bree. She tricks him into going to his parents' house. And he goes upstairs to his old bedroom and he's looking around, and most of his childhood things have been boxed up and put away, but he still reflects in his mind that when he came back, even though he'd only been gone 19 days, he still felt like a stranger in his own house, in his own room. Those things his room had felt like a museum to him. It didn't feel like home. So I think just as he has a difficult time finding or establishing any kind of meaningful interpersonal relationships, he has that same difficulty, not as much intimate. It's not like you develop intimacy with a space, but he has a hard time establishing any kind of emotional connection to spaces and places outside of the bar.
Yeah. Well, so the book was published May 16th of this year?
Yes.
Okay. So hell of a cover.
Oh, Blaine Daigle did that, and he is absolutely, yes, the author. He's fabulous.
When did he start doing covers? Sorry, keep interrupting.
He's done several of his own. I know that 2 of his most recent books he did the covers for, and so Patrick, the owner at Wicked House, in talking about cover with me, we kind of bounced some ideas around, and I wasn't sure what I wanted, and I always hate when publishers ask you, what do you want on your cover? Because I'm like, I'm not a cover artist. Please don't ask me that. Just turn them loose. So I told Blaine, here's what the story's about. Here's some background about the characters. Here's some things that happen in the story, some key events. Then that's what he came up with. And the minute I saw it, I was like, this is beautiful. It's perfect. It completely encapsulates the character of Josh and his isolation and his pain and the more supernatural elements of the story as well. But to me, the minute I saw this, I was in love with it. It was perfect.
I've had Blaine on the show a couple of times. I hope none of the books we talked about were his covers because I'm going to feel really stupid.
Oh, no, I know he just had a book that came out today, the Ashes of August Manor. He did the cover on that, and it's beautiful. I believe that he did a Dark Ruse cover as well. If I'm not mistaken, they're beautiful. And he had sent me several to choose from when he came up with that concept, and they were all completely different. They were just so amazing. But that one, when I saw it, I'm like, nope, that's it. That's perfect.
Nice.
Gave me what I wanted, and I didn't even know what in the world I wanted till I saw it. So
I love this indie community where there's everything you need's available. You don't have to.
Yes, and everybody's always so willing to lend a hand to each other, to give advice, to give support, to help. I've met so many amazing people that are so extraordinarily talented. It's just been a really, really wonderful experience coming into this community and trying to worm my way in, so to speak.
Well, when it comes to Josh, your protagonist, your creation, your your baby, I guess, so to speak.
I do feel like that. Yes,
Yeah.
you do feel like that with your characters. You're like, yes, they're all my children.
What's one question you wish more readers would ask about Josh, but never do?
Did he really not remember? Did he really have amnesia? Or was it a conscious decision on his part to not acknowledge or think about or actively recall what happened to him? The book never goes into any detail as to what happens between him and Trainer, primarily because I wouldn't broach that subject. And at one point, Josh even snaps to another character. It's like, do you need me to write you a sign? Do you think we sat around for 19 days watching movies and shooting the shit? So to me, if I was reading the book and I didn't know the answer because I wrote it, I would wonder, did Josh really remember what happened to him? And he just doesn't want to deal with it.
Yeah. Well, that, dear listener, is as far as I'm going to go to avoid spoilers. You'll have to read the book to find out what happens to Josh, the search for Avery, and whether or not Josh can trust anyone he's come into contact with. So, The Vessel is your debut novel-length work with Wicked House Publishing. What inspired you to expand this story into a full-length novel?
The evolution of this story is actually really interesting. And I should preface this by saying The Vessel is my first novel-length horror book. I actually I've been writing and published for over 20 years. I used to write paranormal romances and historical romances under a different pen name, and had some minor success with that didn't carry through. And plus, I'm just not really a romantic kind of girl, so I got sick of writing those, and my stories kept leaning toward the horror, and romance readers don't want to read horror, so I evolved. But the idea for The Vessel started out as the first chapter. I actually wrote the first chapter, that scene with Josh and Bree outside of the prison. I wrote that way before the rest of the story ever developed in my mind. And it was because I don't have them listed there. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, no, I was just looking at what you've... Yeah,
lots of anthologies. I love writing short stories, and I love being parts of anthologies. So
you're in Push?
Yes, that was a great project to be a part of. Ruth Anna Evans. She is absolutely brilliant too. So yes, that is a great book and worth looking into.
All right.
And I lost my train of thought.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I had written the first chapter, or that scene where Josh and Bree arrive at the prison way before the rest of the story developed. In fact, way before there was a Rodriguez and an investigation. The original idea, as I originally wrote it, was Josh and Bree show up. It's Josh's decision to go and confront Trainer for no other purpose except to go in and confront him as an adult. Even originally, Bree was supposed to be his girlfriend, not his sister. That all kind of evolved over time. And it occurred to me after I wrote the scene, I loved the scene, but I didn't know where I was going with it. I didn't know what kind of story it would lead to, what kind of plot line it would follow. So it was one of those, I put it on the back burner for a while. And I do this a lot with things. I'll come up with an idea, I'll write a little bit of it, and then it's not going anywhere. So I put it aside, and then I come back to it with fresh eyes. And when I came back to it with fresh eyes, I thought, this is really a powerful opening. It's a powerful introduction. I need to come up with a story that suits this. And so the minute that I came up with the idea of Rodriguez and then an investigation further into Trainer and other crimes he may have committed, then everything else just started falling into place after that.
Gotcha. Well, you grew up in the heart of Kentucky, the bluegrass state. Little side note, I used to play bluegrass. So how has your upbringing or the culture of that region influenced the atmosphere or emotional tone of your horror writing?
I think we're enough of the South in Kentucky that we're very welcoming and very open. And I think that I've relay that through a lot of my characters. There's definitely Southern sensibilities in most of my characters. Like me, they tend to talk way too much, share way too much, say y'all and a whole lot. But another thing I love about Kentucky and this region, there's a lot of folklore. The Appalachian Mountains and the Appalachian foothills are just rife with wonderful folklore about cryptids and about UFOs and about different kinds of rituals and things like that. Here in Louisville, where I live, for example, we're having a festival that's coming up soon to celebrate the Goat Man, who supposedly lives out on a bridge, and this old railroad bridge. And it attracts cryptid seekers from all over the country who go out looking for the Goat Man. There's so many incidences or so many cases of things like that in this area that are just, it makes it such a rich cultural mythology that's developed, not just here in Kentucky, but in the Appalachian tract altogether. I think that really, I try to share a lot of that with my writing whenever I can, just because there's so much to pull from and so many ideas to inspire you.
Gotcha. So this one I was really interested in. Your short story, You've Been Saved, was adapted for the film Worst Laid Plans. What was it like seeing your work translated to the screen? And did that experience influence how you write now? And I just want to let the audience see this cover here.
Oh, that was yes. There are several covers for it, and that's definitely one of them. It was such a tremendous honor to have my story selected to be among this. It was actually one of the stories in Worst Laid Plans, an anthology that came out from Grindhouse Press, that's now out of print. And the editor of that collection picked several stories to be in the movie anthology. And when she called me to let me know that she had picked my story, I was floored. It was just such a tremendous honor. And it's so, the director and screenwriter who did the adaptation, his name is Christopher Moore, and he's fabulous. And he puts so much hard work and effort into this, and it just really shines. He took the story in a different direction than I did, and it was fascinating to me to see where he reimagined it. But even if it was like a strict to the letter interpretation of the story, I've had the same thing happen when I've heard audio versions of my stories. To hear someone else's interpretation of it, it's like you don't recognize it as your own. You hear it fresh, like it's for the first time, even though it's yours.
Somebody changed the font.
Yes. But the movie version of it, I was just so absolutely thrilled watching it. They did such a wonderful job. And really, like I said, Christopher gave it his own spin, because for me, when I wrote this story, I don't ever describe, it's a creature feature, but I don't ever tell you what the creatures look like or what they are or what their purpose is. Because to me, a lot of times with my horror, I feel like what's left to the imagination is more terrifying than anything that you could write on the page. That doesn't translate well to film, though. Film works better when you can actually see something scary. And Christopher definitely delivered on terrifying creatures to go along with the creature feature. And I loved his take on it. It was just, to me, that's, if I live to be 100 years old, that will be one of the most amazing things that has ever happened to me. Something I never would have anticipated in all the years that I've been writing, that I would ever get to see my work brought to life like that. And it was such a thrill and such an honor.
Nice. Well, what kinds of horror stories are you most drawn to as a writer and a viewer, I suppose? Psychological, supernatural, body horror?
I like all different kinds, actually. I try to write different kinds of things because that's one thing I really like about the horror genre. There are so many different subgenres. That was one of the things that really gets old in writing something like romance, you have to follow a specific formula, and it's kind of insert tab into slot A. It's one of those. But other than that, it's very formulaic. There's a specific formula. This happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, the end. And you have so much more creative liberty in writing horror. And you can incorporate anything and make it horrific. I've written historicals. I love history. I'm a big history nerd. So I wrote an Old West, one that was set in the Old West. Good Lord, I never would have imagined myself writing a cowboy story. But I wrote a cowboy story and I loved it. And it's called Prairie Madness, and it's available through Bainham Books. And it's gotten such good reviews. And I'm just always so excited when people connect to it. At the same time, I wrote a short story, The Curious Case of Henry Harrington, that's set in Victorian England. So I learned all about that. I'm working on a story right now that's set in 1923 in New York City during the, Prohibition period. So I love that I have that. It's a wide open expanse. Anything goes with horror, because horror happens all around you every day. And you're not just relegated to creature features, monsters, ghosts, serial killers. You can pick whatever you want to give it horrific elements. And to me, that's just such an abundance of creative freedom.
Well, speaking of the book, would you like to read a passage from it?
Sure, I'd be glad to.
All
I have to put on my cheaters, though, because I'm old.
No, trust me. Give me 6 more months and I'm going to need cheaters.
I thought since we had been talking about the opening chapter of the book that I'd just read a little bit from that, if it's okay.
Sure.
Okay. So chapter 1. I doubled my Ativan before leaving home this morning. Even so, by the time we pulled into the prison parking lot, I had dug my fingernails so deep into the passenger side armrest that I had left indelible marks. All the way there, I tried the tricks I'd learned to ward off panic attacks. Focus on my breathing, not deep or anything, just steady and slow. Look at my arm, my hand, the pattern of stitches along the seam of my jeans. Feel the denim beneath my fingertips. Hear the drone of the car radio. Be in the moment, not the past. Focus. Josh. Bree said my name softly, almost like a prayer, but still it startled me. She'd pulled into a parking space, turned off the car, and I hadn't even noticed. How long had I been sitting there staring out the windshield with a 1,000-yard stare? I'm all right, I mumbled, reaching for my seatbelt buckle. She draped her hand over mine. Her skin felt cold, but I jerked away like she'd scalded me. I said I'm all right. I got out of the car, my breath frosting around my face as I looked at the prison. A strong breeze made the flag in front of the main building flutter restlessly, its metal rings clanging against the flagpole. The building itself looked almost medieval, with its tall, narrow windows, imposing stone facade, and towering battlements and parapets. Even though the sun was out, it seemed as if those rough-hewn walls swallowed the light the way a black hole would. Several steep flights of stairs ascended from the visitors' lot to the processing center. I heard the car doors shut. Damp asphalt crunched beneath Bree's shoes as she joined me. Why don't you wait in the car, I said. Like hell, you're not going in there alone. I won't be. Rodriguez is meeting me at the visitors' check-in, and I don't want you going in this place. The idea was almost like the thought of Traynor touching her, which was pretty much unbearable. I don't want you going in there, she said. Yeah, but I have to. No, you don't. She looked up, and now I could see tears welling in her eyes, making the whites turn all moist and pink, like peppermint candies that had been licked. You don't have to do any of this. Yeah, I said again, I do. When I was 13, a man named Michael Traynor abducted me. His methods were crude, no online grooming or anything fancy like that. Rather, he saw me riding my bike one Saturday morning, figured I'd be an easy mark, and hit me with his car. That part took some finesse, I guess, because he managed to tap the back wheel of my bicycle without actually running me over. It knocked me sideways, and I busted my knees and palms on the gravel shoulder of the road. In a flash, he stepped out of the car, the engine still running, and before I could recover, he clapped a rag over my mouth that he dunked in chloroform. From that point, I blacked out, and I don't know how long it took for me to come back around. When I did, I found myself lying in bed in an unfamiliar house, my mouth covered with duct tape, hands bound, and a dead boy beneath the nearby window. That's the last thing I remember until 19 days later I noticed red and blue police lights flashing through that same window. My arms and legs felt weighted down with concrete blocks, my head filled with cobwebs and fog as I stumbled toward that flickering glow. It was nighttime, and I remember how cold it was when I stepped outside, enough to shock the breath from me. The police car was in the driveway next door, the neighbors shouting and shoving each other in their front yard. But their angry voices cut abruptly short as they all caught sight of me, barefoot, naked, and shivering. That kid looked like something out of a fucking horror movie, one of the neighbors later told a TV news crew. They beeped out the expletive, but you could still read the guy's lips. Buck-ass naked, nothing but skin and bones, and that goddamn mask covering his head.
I have complete control over them. They do whatever I say. Well, that was good. I remember that opening scene. Sets one hell of a tone.
Well, thank you.
Well, what is the life of S.E. Howard like outside of writing?
Outside of writing, I stay pretty busy. I am actually a registered nurse. I'm a certified specialist in poison information, so I'm a toxicology nurse. I work for Poison Center, so I do a lot of telephonic triage. I'm also a mom. I've got 2 college-age kids. I'm married, have been married for about almost 25 years now, and have a puppy who's 2 years old, going on 3 months, but judging by her very rowdy behavior. So I wear lots of hats, juggle lots of things in the air all at one time, and try not to rip all my hair out in the process.
Well, Sarah, it has been a pleasure talking with you.
Well, thank you. It's been an absolute delight to meet you, and I appreciate you listening to me ramble.
The best guests are the ones that ramble. You weren't rambling. I'm just kidding. You weren't rambling. Well, as we bring the show to a close, is there anything you'd like to plug or let your readers know about?
I invite them to come and visit me online at my website. It is www.sehoward.com.
It is not a cam room, people.
No cam room whatsoever. But I keep up to date with all of my new releases, including anthologies that I'm a part of. I hope that readers will check those out because there are some fantastic collections that I am very, very, very honored to be a part of. There are purchase links that are available on my website. I also keep a blog where I do book reviews. I've just now kind of started getting into that a little bit more deeply, and I'm really enjoying it. So, and I love sharing my 2 cents worth, as I like to call it, with anyone who will sit still long enough. So, yes, I hope that readers will come and visit online, and hope that they'll check out a copy of The Vessel, which is available in ebook and paperback now.
Oh, yeah. All right, sounds good. Well, listeners at home, all links are in the description. And Sarah, thank you again for joining me.
Thank you again for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
And thank you to everyone who tuned in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Be sure to tune in next Tuesday for a new episode featuring the best and brightest authors and filmmakers of dark literature and film. So until then, stay healthy, stay sane, and as always, thank you for listening. See you next time.